We had a couple of guys at the tight end position go missing in week 6. Dalton Kincaid wasn't able to go on Monday Night Football. Now he heads into the bye, but will we be getting George Kittle back? Let's jump into every single matchup to find out which tight ends we should be playing this week. And when you've got a tight end going up against Cincinnati who allows the most fantasy points per game to the position, you absolutely want to play them. Unless they're a Pittsburgh Steelers tight end who currently have 4 guys rotating on and off the field. That makes things incredibly difficult for fantasy owners because to begin the year, it was Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Darnell Washington has seen his snap percentage climb all the way up to over 80%. This past week, Darnell Washington led the way with 80%. Jonnu Smith was at 69%. Pat Freiermuth was at 36%, Connor Hayward was at 10%. And on the one target that Connor Hayward got, he scored a touchdown. This is a great matchup, and I would love to play somebody here. But can we really risk it with 4 tight ends rotating? Can we really risk trying to play Jonnu Smith? Can we really risk trying to go with Darnell Washington at this point? Or do we go with Pat Freiermuth? I don't think so. Not on Thursday Night Football. One of these guys could end up having a decent day. Heck, a couple of them could end up having a decent day. But which ones will it be? And with, again, so many tight ends at the position this year that we can actually utilize on a weekly basis, it doesn't make sense to take the risks that we used to do at the tight end position. Cincinnati also has a solid matchup going up against Pittsburgh, currently allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Mike Gesicki's dealing with an injury though right now, and we really haven't seen the tight end position utilized all that much. But if Mike Gesicki ends up missing this week, Noah Fant in a really solid matchup, I'll go ahead and keep an eye on him. He saw 4 targets last week. He caught all 4 of them. It was only for 27 yards, but Noah Fant could be a guy that's right on the outside of the top 12 looking in. For the LA Rams, it sounds like Puka Nacua is going to potentially miss some time. Maybe just 1 week, maybe he ends up feeling great and does play this week. As of this recording, there has been nothing to tell us otherwise. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens. If Puka ends up missing this game, Tyler Higbee is going to be a fringe start for me. It's not a great matchup. Jacksonville currently allows the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to the tight end position. But last week, Tyler Higbee had 4 targets, caught all 4 of them for 40 yards, and a touchdown. With no Puka Nacua, Tyler Higbee could be fringe once again. With Brenton Strange headed to the IR, Hunter Long steps up as the starting tight end, but he's not going to give you Brenton Strange production that we saw at the beginning of the year. They spread the ball around a lot last week. Jacksonville had 10 players that saw at least 2 targets. 11 players saw 1 target. Hunter Long saw 3. I wouldn't be looking to dive into him for this matchup, especially since it's in London. I hate to do it to Juwan Johnson, but I gotta list him as a sit, and he's going to be a sit moving forward as of right now. And it's not even Taysom Hill doing it to him. Heck, it's not even Foster Moreau that's doing it to him. Both of those guys returned, but Taysom Hill hasn't even saw a target yet since he returned. He's basically being utilized at the running back or quarterback position. Juwan Johnson at this point, Foster Moreau only saw 1 target last week. Johnson saw 3. I don't know why he's just disappeared from the game plan. I don't know why they're not going to target him anymore. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But until we see him get back up on that horse, we're going to have to go ahead and list him as a sit. The Saints have allowed 4 touchdowns to opposing tight ends, which is tied for 3rd most in the league right now. But Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet don't hold any fantasy value currently. They combined for 4 targets on Monday Night Football. Loveland was a little bit banged up. He came out of the bye and was able to play. Because of that, both of these guys are going to see 2-3 targets tops per week, maybe 4, and unless one of them scores a touchdown, we can't roll with it. And like I've already mentioned, the tight end position is much deeper this year than it has been in years past, so there's no reason to go hunting for guys that really need a touchdown to make it work. Darren Waller did not give us the upside that we would have liked last week, but he still scored another touchdown, salvaging his fantasy day and giving him 4 touchdowns in 3 weeks since he returned. He had back-to-back weeks as a top 5 tight end. Last week, he was tight end 16. In this matchup going up against Cleveland, I expect Darren Waller to still give us touchdown potential, and hopefully the floor goes up a little bit as the volume comes back. The Cleveland tight ends have a great matchup against Miami this week, who currently allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. However, they've allowed the 3rd most receiving yards, so the floor should hopefully be a lot better this week. David Njoku didn't do much last week. Harold Fannin, he was the guy. And I really see David Njoku as having a better floor than Harold Fannin, but with the way Harold Fannin is utilized, I see him having a higher ceiling. This week, I think they're both on the fringe, maybe right at the very end, looking into the top 12. This is the roller coaster that is owning Hunter Henry as your tight end, because he's going to have a couple of big weeks where you get super excited. He seems like he's a smash start, and then he's going to disappear for a couple of weeks as well. Will he get back to that upside though this week? Tennessee currently allows the 9th fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends, and he's completely disappeared here as of recently. Henry does not have more than 4 targets in a game over the last 3 weeks. He has 9 targets total the last 3 games after having 11 targets altogether in week 3 this season. It's up and down, and after 3 bad weeks, maybe we get back to the top again. After Calvin Ridley went down with his hamstring injury earlier in that game last week, Chigioco actually provided some solid numbers. 6 targets, 6 receptions, and he had 46 receiving yards. Not great numbers, but if there's no Calvin Ridley this week, we've got a shot at Chigioco being fantasy viable once again, especially given the matchup. New England right now allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game and the 5th most receiving yards. I'm going to go ahead and list Brock Bowers as questionable once again this week. He's not been placed on IR, but it was made known by the coaching staff that he may miss a few weeks as of now. That could end up changing. Michael Mayer had a solid week last week. He scored a touchdown. He was inside the top 12 tight ends, and people may be taking a look at him moving forward. But this matchup against Kansas City isn't one that I would love. They had not allowed a touchdown all season long until Sam Laporta made an amazing grab at the back of the end zone. And currently they still allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game. So this matchup I don't believe is good enough to venture down the prospects of starting Michael Mayer this week when we got some other options I think are better. Las Vegas is allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but Travis Kelce has been very solid so far this season. It's not the upside that you used to get with him, but you've got a guy right now that's getting you at least 6 targets in 4 of 6 games this season. He's been a top tight end also in 4 of 6 games this season. With Travis Kelce, it's all about the floor. Dallas Goedert has done an amazing job of taking care of you in your fantasy lineup over the last couple of weeks. He has had a ton of upside. This matchup against Minnesota is not great. Minnesota currently allowing the 9th fewest receiving yards. However, they have allowed 3 touchdowns to opposing tight ends so far. And that's one thing that Dallas Goedert has been very good about, scoring touchdowns. He's got a touchdown in 4 straight games. Over those 4 games, he scored 5 total touchdowns. Now, the targets were something that weren't really coming in at a high rate to begin the season, but over the last 2 weeks, he's had 20 total targets. And right now, he's the tight end 1 overall 2 of the last 3 weeks. So for as good of a job as Dallas Goedert is of taking care of your lineup, then maybe you should do a good job of taking care of your tight end. And if you're looking to take better care of your tight end, then the people over at Tushy are exactly who you need to be talking to. And the tight end video makes perfect sense for us to promote our partners over at Tushy right now. You can check them out over at tushy.com or use the link in the description of the video down below. And when you check out, use code Headliners for 15% off of your purchase. They've got some awesome things over there, so go check out their products and see if there's anything that you could take advantage of. For as much as we love tight ends, the football kind, Tushy loves tight ends, the real kind. TJ Hawkinson has been a major disappointment this season. With no Jordan Addison to begin the year, he still wasn't all that great. The switch from JJ to McCarthy after his injury to Carson Wentz still hasn't brought him any fantasy relevancy. He only has 1 top 12 performance this season. And in this matchup, going up against the Eagles, who currently allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points and receiving yards to tight ends, I just can't get on board with it. His best performance outside of that 1 top 12 performance is tight end 23. For Carolina and the New York Jets, this could end up being a tougher matchup for the wide receivers. So obviously, I wanted to look at the tight ends here. But one thing we have to take a look at is Ja'Tavion Sanders and his health. He is expected back at practice this week, and how much he practices is still yet to be known. So he may not even play, and if that happens, then Tommy Tremble, he can end up having decent upside this week. It's going to be fairly touchdown dependent, but it would still be a good shot if you're somebody that's struggling at the tight end position, or maybe you're missing Dalton Kincaid this week. Now for the New York Jets, they do allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, even though they allow the 10th fewest receiving yards. It's because they've allowed 6 receiving touchdowns to tight ends so far this year. So for Sanders, he's going to be back at practice, no telling if he'll actually be able to play. So for Tommy Tremble, it's all about the touchdown, baby. If he can get it, we're all set. This is a great matchup for Mason Taylor, and I know he was extremely disappointing last week. Basically, everybody was disappointing last week, it felt like, especially that London game. But with no Garrett Wilson, more than likely at this point, Mason Taylor, who has been the number 2 target on this team for the last several weeks, could end up being the number 1 target going up against Carolina, who currently allow the 2nd most fantasy points per game and the most receiving yards to opposing tight ends. Before last week, Mason Taylor had 25 total targets in the 3 previous games, so he was absolutely trending up. And he could get back to being a very good floor option at the tight end position this week if Garrett Wilson can't go. Theo Johnson, another guy that was trending up that just couldn't get the job done last week, and it wasn't the best matchup in the world for him. And this week going up against Denver, it doesn't look good either. Denver's currently allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but Jackson Dart has to throw the ball to somebody. Darius Slayton's been banged up. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is done for the season. Wan'Dale Robinson is the number 1, but I'm not convinced that Lil Jordan Humphrey is going to be the number 2 every single week. I would love to see that number 2 become Theo Johnson. Unfortunately, I would have to put him at the back end of tight ends that we would consider. I want to list Evan Ingram as just a start, and I want to have him near the top 12 in my rankings. I'm still a little apprehensive. Since he's returned from his injury, he does have 29 targets. He just hasn't really turned those targets into anything, but we've seen Evan Ingram start to see some utilization that Sean Payton talked about this offseason, whether it be short routes, deep routes, even getting some stuff out of the backfield where he has a chance to run the football. They want the ball in Evan Ingram's hands, and they think he's athletic enough to add a wrinkle to this offense that opposing teams are going to have trouble stopping. The targets, hopefully they keep up. And if they do, and he starts building some more volume with those targets, he's going to be a startable option every week. Indianapolis going up against the LA Chargers. Tyler Warren might be going up against a defense that allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game, but it doesn't matter. He's been a top 12 tight end in 5 of 6 games this season, and now he has touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. He's a top 5 tight end right now, and he's doing exactly what he did at Penn State, which isn't lose like they are. Sorry, Penn State fans. He's winning now in Indianapolis, but he's being utilized all over the field. With no Quentin Johnston last week, Oronde Gadsden had a really solid week. 8 targets, 7 receptions, 68 receiving yards. But you think back to a couple of weeks ago where he only had 1 target and 1 reception, there's still some inconsistencies there. So we'll keep an eye on Quentin Johnston this week. If he can play, Gadsden probably goes to being a sit for me. But if Quentin Johnston misses again, I would consider Oronde Gadsden over some of the other fringe options that we've listed, mainly guys like Theo Johnson. Last week was the first time in years that Zach Ertz didn't even see 1 target in a game. So seeing 6 targets and catching all 6 of them for 42 yards and a touchdown was a huge bounce back that fantasy owners sorely needed. It's his 3rd tight end 1 performance of the year, and with Terry McLaurin still banged up and not sure if he's going to play this week, I'll go ahead and list Zach Ertz as a start once again. I know a lot of people are freaking out about Jake Ferguson with CeeDee Lamb expected back any week now. And it could even be this week that CeeDee Lamb comes back. He was at practice last week in a limited capacity. He's probably going to be limited again once this week, but he's going to continue to ramp up. If CeeDee Lamb were to start this week, I'm still going to have Jake Ferguson as a start as well. Is he a top 2 or top 4 tight end? Maybe not, but he's still going to be inside my top 12. This matchup is not great. Washington currently currently allows the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But this past week was Jake Ferguson's 5th straight top 10 game at the tight end position, and he has 4 touchdowns over the last 3 games. And for those of you that make the argument that Jake Ferguson is not going to be startable after CeeDee Lamb comes back because those targets are going to go to CeeDee Lamb, I would argue a little bit that it doesn't really matter. Jake Ferguson is still going to be startable because this past week, he only had 3 targets. But guess what? He caught one of them for a touchdown. And that's what you're going to get. A guy 3 to 5 targets, maybe 6 targets. You're going to get some games where he sees some more. He's going to be a red zone threat. And he's going to be a threat to pick up some bigger plays when CeeDee Lamb returns because people are going to have to keep an eye on Lamb and Pickens. So even if the volume bounces down a little bit, he's still a top 12 option based on big playability and touchdown potential. Tucker Kraft, a solid week last week after the bye. Now he gets the Arizona Cardinals, allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. He was able to find a touchdown, which we've talked about before. He's very touchdown dependent because he just doesn't get a consistent amount of targets. But given this is such a solid matchup, we'll go ahead and list him as a start instead of a fringe start. Trey McBride, the leading receiver for Arizona once again. Marvin Harrison Jr. may miss another week due to his concussion, and he's going up against Green Bay, who currently allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Let's lock in Trey McBride. We are used to seeing some poor performances from Kyle Pitts, and this past week was his worst performance of the year so far. But the one thing we'll say about Kyle Pitts is he's shown a little bit of a better floor than what we've seen over previous years. Yes, it's still wildly inconsistent and probably will be the rest of the year, especially since Drake London is healthy and turning it back up a notch, just like we predicted this offseason. But for Kyle Pitts, 2 games inside the top 12, 2 other games inside the top 24, and this past week was his first time outside the top 24. Are you still going to play him? Probably. Would you rather have somebody else? Absolutely. But until that becomes an option for you to grab someone off waivers or make a trade, we're probably still going to start Kyle Pitts. Atlanta's defense has been really good this season, and they currently allow the fewest fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Now, on Monday Night Football, they gave up a touchdown really early in the game to Dawson Knox, and then held him to barely anything the rest of the game. Jake Tonjes, for me this week, is a sit. But George Kittle could end up being back. And if he plays, even if it's on a limited basis, Jake Tonjes is not going to be out there nearly as much. George Kittle, if he does end up playing this week and coming off IR, I would consider him a fringe option because more than likely you've been holding on to George Kittle and you've been trying to maneuver your way with another tight end, whether it be off waivers or a couple of guys that you just go back and forth with until Kittle comes back. If you're one of those owners that don't have a better option, then we can roll with Kittle. But if you have a safer option that you were able to grab after week 1 when Kittle was injured, you may not have to start him right away. The first Monday night game, this one kicks off at 7 o'clock, will be Tampa Bay and Detroit. Cade Otton will be a fringe start for me. He saw 6 targets last week, and now that we might be missing the top 3 options in the pass catching game, Evans, Ibuka, and Chris Godwin, Cade Otton, for me, does have a little bit of potential. Sam Laporta has back-to-back games as the tight end 4 overall, which is what you want to see if you drafted Sam Laporta, but he's still going to have some up and downs. Sometimes he's going to be top 10, other times he's going to be outside the top 15. That's just how this offense operates. They can spread the ball around to multiple weapons. This week, I expect him to be a little bit lower than what we've seen because I expect them to also get back to running the football. Houston at Seattle, the second Monday night game. This one kicks off at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Dalton Schultz is going to be a fringe start option for me, a very low ceiling fringe start option, but one nonetheless. Right now, Seattle is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and Dalton Schultz has 3 state games with at least 6 targets. 6 targets? Good matchup, decent floor. Houston, on the other hand, not nearly as good of a matchup. A.J. Barner is a fringe start because of that. Houston currently allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends. And while we're seeing some of the big yardage pickup for A.J. Barner, he only has 1 game this season where he has more than 3 targets. He's playing 80% of the snaps. Elijah Arroyo is not getting looked at any more often than what Barner is, but Barner has more touchdown potential and more big play potential, so even without the volume in terms of targets, he's still a solid play. What's your tight end position looking like right now? Are you feeling comfortable with someone that you can set and forget? Or do you have a couple of people that you're trying to survive with right now? George Kittle might be back for you. Hopefully Dalton Kincaid is healthy after the break, and then you'll be all set at the tight end position once again with those guys. But do me a favor, leave a comment down below and let me know how the tight end position looks for you. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure if you subscribe that you're new here, and also turn on the bell notifications. Anytime we drop new content, then you'll see it right away on your screen. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.